Okay, we're gonna go over the tools you need. Some of the basics ones: 3/8 ratchet, 1/4 inch ratchet, 3/8 torque wrench, torque the injectors down. To pop the injectors out, you can use a few different things. You can either use an adjustable heel bar, works pretty good, or just a standard small crow's foot, lady's foot. Pop them out. You'll need your overhead, a 10 and 20, to adjust your intake and exhaust on your rockers. Your overhead when you're done. Get the transfer tube nut out. You need a 24 mil snap-on 12-point. Works pretty well. It gets on there easy. 8 mil 3/8 drive. Torque the injectors down. Some miscellaneous sockets, 10 mils, 8 mil wobbly and extension works good to get the injector pull downs out. 11 mil to get your intake horn. A few extensions. 19 mil wrenches to loosen all your lines, tighten them up, and some 10 mils, 8 mil, and you might need a few various other sockets depending on the truck. Okay, today we're going to go over installation and removal of common rail Dodge injectors. So we'll get started right here and go from there.
Remember, anytime working underneath the hood of a truck, you should always disconnect the battery cables.
Anytime you suspect injector or fuel system issues, you want to check the fuel quality. You want to drain the fuel bowl, and once you've drained the fuel bowl, you can inspect the fuel in your drain pan and in the fuel filter cartridge. So once you get the fuel filter out, take it out. A lot of times you can catch metal flakes down in the fuel filter bowl or on the filter itself. You also want to check for water and rust. And anytime that you notice any rust on the transfer tubes or the injector bodies when you pull them out, you're going to want to drop the tank and go from there as far as cleaning the lines on the frame, making sure there's no water in the tank, figure out how the water got in the tank, and clean everything before you run your new injectors. Okay, so the first thing, pulling the truck apart, you're going to want to take the intake horn off. Just remove the clamp, ream the boot. And once you get the intake horn off, you can move it out of the way. Move the grid heater and other wiring out of the way. Put a towel down the intake. Don't forget to take it out. Just make sure that no bolts fall in. Take the cam breather and crankcase ventilation tubes off the side of the valve cover. From there you can loosen the bolts. Get all the bolts, 10 mils, out of the valve cover. Once you've got the valve cover off, you can set it aside. Use it to hold all the intake and exhaust rockers if you want. That way they don't go nowhere. Once you get the valve cover wiring harness out of the way, work on taking the rocker case off. Once the rocker box is out of your way, the next thing you're going to want to do is remove the fuel lines, 19 mils. Spin them off out of your way. Some trucks you have to take the lifting bracket off the back, 215 mils. Set it aside. Then remove the bolt from the top of the rail for the PRV. Kind of just get that out of your way a little bit, so once you get the bolts out of the rail, you can pull the rail out. Then remove the feed, 19 mil, from the pump to the rail. Once it's loose, you can remove all your hold downs for your fuel lines, the 10 mils. Remove the 10 mils from the rail to the intake manifold. Once you get everything loose, you can take the rail and move it aside. Get it out of your way. Once all that's out of your way, you can remove the 10 mils that hold the exhaust rockers down. You You may or may not have to loosen the intake rocker depending on where the cam's at. So you'll know if you have to loosen it once you go to pop the injector up. On the exhaust rockers and intake rockers, you want to be careful. You want to grab it and make sure you're grabbing the button that goes to the valve bridge, just in case the plastic keeper's broken. So just make sure when you grab it you hold both ends so you're not dropping any parts. From there you'll use a 24mm snap-on socket or a Cornwell. 12-point works really good to remove the transfer tube nuts. You can break them all loose. And then remove the transfer tube nuts and set them aside. When you go to pull the transfer tube out, most of the time you can just pluck it out. If you have one that's stubborn, you can use a Miller plug, part number 9011. Works pretty well to put on the transfer tube, and then use a prying device to pop them out of the cylinder head. Once you get the transfer tubes out, you can get your 8mm and remove the 2 hold down bolts to hold the injector. Once you get all the bolts out, you can get your hill bar, either just a standard hill bar or a snap-on adjustable head. Hill bar works pretty well. This is the point where you'll realize whether or not you have to loosen the intake rocker. If you get one that you can tell is catching on the intake rocker, just loosen it up. Once you get them all up, just pop them up, set them aside. Make sure you check, make sure there's a copper. If you take note now, if there's not a copper, you can fish it out later before you put the new injector in. Before you install the injectors, it's always good to get a blower nozzle and a towel. Make sure you blow out the holes, get all the fuel and oil out. Make sure you get a good seal. Make sure you cover it up good with a rag so you don't get oil everywhere. Take a mirror, look in the hole, double check, make sure there's no coppers. Once you got your new injectors laid out, you're going to grease them up. Get a little assembly lube or grease. Grease up the O-ring, lift the copper up and put a little dab of grease on the nozzle nut. That'll hold the copper on the injector so it won't fall off when you're going to install it. Right here you want to inspect the transfer tubes for any scarring or abnormal lines or wear to make sure they're going to seal up good. Any vertical line is going to be where high pressure fuel was leaking past, so just make sure you can't feel anything with your fingernail. Once you know they're good, you can grease up the O-ring on those to make them pop in a little bit easier. Take the injector, you want to line it up with the transfer tube hole in the injector facing where the transfer tube enters the cylinder head, and pop it down. Once you got the injector set in there, you can grab your transfer tubes and pop them in. If you notice, they have 2 alignment balls. So if you put them into the hole on the cylinder head and give it a little twist, pressure, you'll feel it pop in from there. Push it and you'll feel it click in and seat towards the injector. You can also watch the injector will kind of kick a little bit and you know that it's lined up. From there you want to make sure you put your transfer tube nuts on and thread them down just lightly by hand, and then install your injector hold down bolts. And if you notice, all the bolts and transfer nuts have been cleaned, so there's not any dirt going back for installation. Once you got everything in there hand tight, you can do your first torque to 11 foot-pounds on the transfer tube nuts. Highly advise you the digital torque wrench. From there, you can take the 8mm hold downs on the injector and just thread them down evenly. You want to make sure you thread them down nice and evenly, just with light hand pressure, and then go back and get your torque wrench. And once you get your torque wrench, you're going to make sure you torque them down evenly to 89 inch-pounds. So right here, you'll torque them down evenly, 89 inch-pounds. You can move back and forth to make sure that you're actually torquing the bolts down as equally as possible. You get the same amount of pressure on each side of the injector. Once you're done torquing the injectors, you can do your final torque on your transfer tube nuts at 45 foot-pounds. Once you get those all torqued, you can start assembling everything that you just torn apart. Reverse process of the teardown. Once you get your intake and exhaust rockers on, you can torque them down to 27 foot-pounds. And it's always a good idea to double check your intake rockers in case you did have to loosen one up to get the injector out and make sure they're all torqued. And once you get them torqued, you can run through your overhead, your exhaust at 20 thousandths, your intake at 10 thousandths. Once your overhead's done, you can finish putting it back together. You can put the rocker cage back on, torque the bolts to 18 foot-pounds if you like. Clean off your wiring harness and install it. Connect the wires to the electrical solenoid on the injector and tighten it to 11 inch-pounds or 1.25 Newton meters. Here you put the truck back together, make sure you take the rag out of the intake horn, inspect the grid heater gaskets and get new ones if needed. And from there, once everything's tightened up, you're ready to start. Reconnect your battery cables and clean all your tools off and you should be ready to go.